genre and about 1,500 species. The edible botanical varieties of macadamia nuts are only 2. There are 10 botanical varieties, but only 2 of them are edible. That's the tetraphylla and the integrifolia. We'll see a chart about the difference, but tetra meaning 4. Where the leaves come out in a whorl, there's always 4 in the tetraphyllas. On the integrifolias, there's 3. And there are some naturally occurring hybrids, which is a hybrid cross between those 2 botanical varieties. And there's lots of horticultural varieties. Every time you plant a seed, you get another horticultural variety. 99% of them won't be worth anything, but every time you plant a seed. But that's why the horticultural varieties are not reproducible other than asexually, like grafting, rooted cuttings, air layering, and tissue culture. The 2 edible botanical varieties are M. integrifolia and the tetraphylla. And here are, if you will, basically the differences between the 2. And the main way you can tell is by looking at the number of whorls in a leaf. If the leaf has a whole lot of jaggers on it, then it's a tetraphylla, not the integrifolia. Most of the world is growing integrifolias. As you all, I'm sure, know, Hawaii, we relate to macadamia nuts, even though they're native to Australia. Hawaii has done the most work to build a commercial crop by advertising them. And in 1955, the state, well, it was a territory then, passed a law to give all land planted with macadamias tax-free for 5 years. And that's how the industry got rolling in Hawaii. And because of that, the University of Hawaii started doing research. They wanted a nut that they could deep fry in coconut oil to give it a shelf life, to give it enzymes and a bacteria and eat bug eggs and all the other things that are on it. Well, to do that, you need a small spherical round nut. You don't want the outside to be a crispy critter by the time the inside gets done. So that's why they went with the integrifolias. Integrifolias have about 3% less sugar than the tetraphyllas. So the tetraphylla is more readily acceptable as a raw nut because it's sweeter already. You don't need to go through the roasting process. But most of the world is growing integrifolia, certainly all the world that is in the process of roasting the nuts. Now for years, Hawaii was the #1 producer, but as of 7 years ago, Australia overtook them. Australia, they're not too dumb. They said, well, wait, what did Hawaii do? So they passed a law in Australia saying tax-free 5 years. They did that about 25 years ago. They are, as of 7 years ago, the world's #1 producer of macadamias. The 2 major varieties that we grow in California is the Kate. It is a tetraphylla. It was a seedling that was grown on William R. Cate's land in Malibu, and it was, if you will, discovered in 1958. And the Beaumont, that's a naturally occurring hybrid that Dr. J.H. Beaumont found on a visit to Australia. A little bit of the history. It's native to Australia, and you can reach prior to 1857, it was known only to the Aborigines that are at that time about 300,000 of them. The Australians killed an awful lot of them since then. In 1843, this nice German fellow here discovered the M. ternifolia, but he didn't do anything with it. Obviously, the ternifolia isn't one of those tetraphylla or integrifolia. It's a very bitter nut. It really doesn't taste good at all. So I presume that's why he found it, he discovered it, he logged it, and he didn't do anything with it. He said, this thing tastes so disgusting, nobody wants this. By 1857, these 2 gentlemen were walking around looking for things, and they brought back, and we're pretty sure it was integrifolia that they brought back, and they gave it the name macadamia, after John Macadam, who was the secretary of the Philosophical Institute. There's no evidence that John Macadam ever even seen a macadamia. They gave it his name.
So everyone who has Scotch ancestry, that's Scotch, that's Macadam, you know.
All right.
That's where the macadamia come from. My father-in-law. support us.
Yeah, I had some folks say, gee, did they make blacktop out of macadamia nuts? Anyway, 1878, the Integrafolium was introduced into Hawaii by Mr. Purvis of the Honikei Sugar Company. In 1879, the very year after that, Professor Dwinell brought seeds in and planted them up on the campus of Berkeley. That's the first recorded instance of macadamias being planted in California. And they planted those trees up along Strawberry Creek, and till about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, those trees were still there. The last ones were torn down when they wanted to build a new dormitory. They were all gone. At least one of them wasn't Mr. Dwinell. But so they've been in California for a long time, since 1879. In 1890 was the first recorded mass planting, if you will, or planting of macadamia nuts in Rouse Mills in New South Wales, and most of those trees are still there. They were tetraphyllars, and they're huge and they're producing well. So, if you want to know the lifespan of a macadamia, well, it's certainly longer than that. About 1910, we started have this two guys started selling tetraphylla seedlings here in Southern California, and they sold quite a few trees, and a lot of them were just one or two that was planted in the backyards or where there's major plantings in, but it certainly got a lot of trees growing in Southern California. Prior to this gentleman doing his work, the world thought you could not plant, you could not graft a macadamia nut. Macadamia is an interesting tree. You know, most trees underneath the canopy, there's two layers of the xylem and the phloem, one carrying the water and the nutrients up from the roots, the other one carrying the results of photosynthesis back to the rest of the tree. Well, a macadamia nut, the center of the tree carries the water and nutrients up from the roots. So underneath the bark, there's just one layer of the canopy that carries the starch, sugars back around. So it's kind of tricky to graft, but once this little guy showed us how, we haven't had any trouble since then. Here's where the legislature passed the law to really get the industry rolling in there. If you remember in the 40s, United Airlines gave you a little package of macadamia nuts and all the flights into and out of. That really got folks interested. But World War II, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Not long ago, I saw a little foil package of macadamia nuts with that big Kenya elephant on it. Kenya macadamia nuts. And so all the Lufthansa flights out of Europe were given free macadamia nuts to all the flights into Kenya. Kenya, Malawi, and South Africa have planted a lot of macadamia nuts. This little interesting thing right here, as I said, underneath the bark is just one layer that carries the starch and sugars back. So if you take a branch and girdle it, you just rip it right down to bare wood. The the sugars, the results of photosynthesis, can't get back to the rest of the tree, so it builds up in that branch. So if you girdle up your budwood 6 or 7 weeks before you take it off the tree, you've got a piece of wood that's got a lot of extra energy in it, so it can stand the rigors of waiting while it mates up with the tree if you're doing grafting. And there you will see this guy. That's what we're doing right here, is ripping the bark off, clear down the bare wood, so that this part out here, this part out here in the branch is setting up extra starches and sugars. This really set, if you will, Hawaii out on the macadamia industry with World War II and all of those GIs going through Hawaii. They all got introduced to macadamia nuts. And for us, it was Colonel Wells Miller and Vernon Nutsall, who came back from World War II, all hot to trot about propagating macadamias. They started the M&M nursery in Vista, and they put out a lot of trees. About that time, we had a lot of avocado trees suffering from Cinnamomum phytophthora, the root rot. And they were looking for, the Avocado Society, for a tree to take the place of an avocado and root rot infested soil. So they did some research and they discovered macadamias aren't particularly susceptible to Cinnamomum phytophthora. What they did was they took some soil that they knew had Cinnamomum phytophthora, planted an avocado in it, it died. They yanked the avocado out, put a macadamia seedling in it, and it thrived. So they were pretty well convinced that the macadamia got along pretty well with phytophthora root rot. Well, it does up to a point. If you leave the roots to itself, it is completely resistant to Cinnamomum, but if you get a break in the roots, you got a gopher down there chewing on it, you're digging around with your shovel. Once you break the root, it can take the pathogen up, and what you'll see is a big canker sore growing on your tree. If you get one of those, cut it out, cut the fungus out, and paint it with some Bordeaux mix. And it'll save your tree, probably. Here was the first big planting, 1,000 acres. And this is where the Avocado Society did their thing on trying to get folks to plant macadamia nuts in California. And as a result of that, the California Macadamia Society was formed in 1953. Horticultural outfit, much like the bear fruit growers, only we specialized just in macadamia. And in '71, we formed a farmers co-op, the Gold Crown Macadamia Association. I'm sure you remember Elvis Snyder. He just passed away last year, but he was the first general manager. If you're looking for macadamia nuts trees, they're, for quite a while, nursery weren't growing, but they're coming back again. Laverne Nursery up in Laverne is growing them. For a long time, all they did was the Beaumont, but they're propagating Cates now also. Clausen's and Vista has some macadamias, but he likes to sell seedlings, so make sure you get a grafted tree. You don't want to get a seedling. Atkins Nursery in Fallbrook and Scott Marina Lows are starting up a nursery in Fallbrook. Okay, irrigation. Macadamias like water. They really like water, just about as much as an avocado tree. So for that reason, it's not necessarily the ideal tree for this part of the world because we don't have that much water, and water's pretty expensive. They're about as cold hardy as an avocado, so if you can grow avocados, you can grow macadamias, but I said they want the same water. You want to put the water out at the drip line. It doesn't do a whole lot of good if you put it up on the trunk of the tree. You need it out. If you think of an umbrella as the outside of that tree, because the feeder roots grow about the same speed as the tree does. So those feeder roots are out there waiting for that water coming off the outside. And if you're irrigating, that's where you want to put it. And you really need to get the top 3 feet of soil wet at least once a week. Now, you know, farming is a pretty individual business. So there's all kinds of different ideas on how to do things. We just talked about Al Snyder. His idea was he wanted his trees every day. So if you walk through his grove, you see roots laying on top of the ground, which I didn't like too much. I water once a week unless there's a Santa Ana, and then I'll kick it up a little twice a week. But when I turn my water on, I run it for 4.5 to 5 hours with little micro, because I want the water to go down. I want them to take the roots down. I guess you'll have to do it. We already talked about how often you ought to apply the water. You put mulch to it. I'm sure you know that is a great way to reduce your tree's water consumption. It keeps evaporation from going on. It keeps the soil a little bit cool. In hot and windy conditions, you need to give them more water. And of course, tensiometers and simises are a good way to figure out when you want to turn the water on and off. The best way to figure out how much you want to give them on fertilizer is to leaf and soil analysis. And while a lot of the ag labs here aren't particularly conversant with macadamia nuts, trees are trees. I mean, trees have individualities, but once they've done a leaf and soil analysis, most of our ag labs can give you a good program for how much fertilizer you want. But macadamias are finicky. You can kill them with kindness. They do not like fertilizer. They gotta have it, they need it, but they don't like it. You give too much nitrogen, you'll kill your trees. I have a phenomenal ability to kill trees with fertilizer. I helped fertilize my groves for 22 years, and they're doing great. And of course, the best fertilizer you got is the grower's footprints through the trees. Look at them, see what's going on. Looking for broken risers, looking for gophers, looking for squirrels. These trees were stumped. This tree here this is 5 years after it was stumped. You know, with avocados, somewhere between 20 and 25 years, they stop producing. They really fall off production. That's why you see in avocado groves, they stump them. That's why they stump them. There's a reason the tree's not producing anymore. So when you drive around, you see all these stumps that are all painted white. They did that because those trees needed to be stumped. This gentleman, this is in the eastern part of Fallbrook, he thought that his trees had stopped, he thought the production was falling off, and he thought he was getting smaller nuts, so he decided to stump them. I haven't seen too many cases of folks doing that. I just did an article on Guatemala. They stump theirs in Guatemala, but they're using the trees for firewood and for cooking. So, and they also have coffee planted in between them, so they don't want big, huge trees that shade the ground. They want smaller trees so they can have the coffee growing in between. So there's a method to people's madness, but you can, in fact, stump the macadamia if you want to. As far as pruning, they don't need it. If you don't like the shape of it, if you don't like the way it's growing, hack at it any way you want to. But if you open up the tree to the sun, put on suntan lotion. And that's what that is. That's white latex paint, 50% white latex paint and 50% water. That's suntan lotion for any tree. So if you open it up to the sun, it will sunburn and it'll kill your tree. So, but other than that, minor precaution, if you want to hack at a tree, go for it. They don't care. And their evergreens are growing all the time, so it really doesn't matter when you do it either. Of course, if you do it just before nuts set, you're going to lose some production. This is called in-arching. This is in the Mauna Loa orchard right there on the Big Island of Hawaii. A lot of times when you graft trees, there's an incompatibility between the scion and the rootstock, and your tree just doesn't thrive. So in this case, they planted 3 seedlings. There's one, and there's one, and then they just grafted them in right up there. So it's not, they gave a growing tree, a tree that was a good tree, and they salvaged it just by planting 3 seedlings and grafted. Here's another. This is a guy in Australia who did the in-arching. I think for the same reason, but he also wanted to give a little bit of stability. And this is a citrus tree in China. See the 3 saplings, seedlings that they grafted into. So you can do it with anything. Yeah. If you got a tree that's not thriving, give it another set of roots.
The original navel tree in Riverside has been treated with in-arching to keep it alive too.
So what is it that it can't actually accomplish?
Well, what you do is you take a tree that exists, that's already growing, and you give it a new set of rootstock. Obviously, what you're saying is there's an incompatibility between the graft, or for whatever reason, the tree isn't getting what it needs from the ground with the roots it has, so you give it another set of roots. Well, you can just cut the tree down and plant a new one, but you've invested a lot of time, energy, and effort in that tree. So rather than, this is an example of cross bracing. This branch grew off of this branch. There's a big crotch down here on that tree. This grew here, so he just grafted that branch onto the other side. I think there's a nail right there if he nailed it fast. And it's just a tight grafting to get some stability. Okay, the pests we have in Southern California, the number one is the southern green stink bug. It's one of the fruit spotting bugs. What this guy does is he's got a long proboscis. He drills a hole through the husk, through the shell, and he sucks on the kernel. Actually, what he does is he dumps the acid out of his stomach onto the kernel. It dissolves it, and then he sucks it back up through his proboscis. If you, the other thing are these little moths, little brown nondescript wasps about the size of your little fingernail, but there's 3 of them that will parasitize. What happens is when the husk splits open on the macadamia, it's a real great place for them to lay their eggs. And very shortly after that, the worm hatches out, and he chews his way right through that shell and goes in and messes up your nut. Number one way to control those is with weed abatement. If you keep the weeds, and of course anything growing in your grove that's not a tree is a weed. It might be an orchid, but out there it's a weed. But as those things, that's where the bugs and those moths are living, and when those plants die off, then they just move right up into your trees. Also, when the nuts, you pick macadamias right, they fall on the ground, so it's a great place for those. They're already down there. They very quickly will parasitize your nuts. So if you keep the weeds out of your grove, you won't have an economic problem. You might lose a few nuts to them, but they're people too, right? A lot of God's critters too. And you can afford to give them a few of those, but you don't want to give them too many. Integrated pest management. There's pesticides. We try to stay away from those because you're going to kill the beneficial bugs. Once you kill the beneficial bugs, then the bad bugs are going to come back with a vengeance. So we try to stay away. Also, if you harvest frequently, they won't be laying around that long for the bugs to get to them. There's our southern green stink bug. This guy. This is what they do to the nuts. Not very tasty. And here's one of those beneficial bugs. This guy right now is eating some moth eggs, and you'd like to get rid of those moths. But if you spray, then you kill these guys. Squirrels and rats. They really like macadamia nuts. And they'll eat your whole trunk if you're not careful. They'll also cause erosion because they're digging holes. The best way to get rid of both of them is with bait and traps. You can poison them, and you can put out traps to, and we'll see some of those now. Gophers, we talked about those a little bit ago. They'll weaken your tree because they eat the roots, but the main thing they do is they open up your tree to send them away right up to work. So you want to keep those guys out of there. Off of my bull, he won't mess with it. No help. But here's what squirrels do. All those bolts for them gets you ready to have some good erosion. And there's what they do to the nuts. See, what they do is they just eat a little. Rats and squirrels do the same thing. They eat a hole and then they stick their rough tongue in and lick the kernel. So they actually kind of dissolve the kernel. They don't open the whole thing up and get to feast on that kernel. They just get a little bit of it at a time. But they'll eat your whole crop. Aha, this is Mo's predecessor. This is Mr. Scout. He left about 2 years ago. But there's a squirrel bait station just made out of 4-inch PVC. It's, because of this T in that elbow, it's stable. You can pick it up and set it down anywhere you want to. Both squirrels and rats like the dark. They like seclusion, so they can run in this hole and they can run back in there in the dark. So you pop that lid off, which keeps the water from getting to it. Fill that over there with poison, and voila. If you got squirrels, once they find that, they take everything and they hide it. So at storage, so once they find it, the stuff's gonna disappear in a hurry, so you gotta keep pouring it to them. But once they start eating it, it'll just wipe out the whole colony. There's basically two different kinds of poison, blood thinner and arsenic. I won't use arsenic because I'm afraid that, well, eat it once and you're dead, but I certainly don't want my dogs, cats, and other things to be eaten and die. But if a squirrel eats the arsenic and my dog eats that dead squirrel, he's certainly going to get sick and it may kill him. Where the blood thinner, it won't do that. There's a Duke 7 or a Coney Bear trap. How many of you know how to set one of those things? I brought one. I'm not sure you guys go back in the back. It's watch me set it. So after I get done, if you want to come up, I'll show you how to set one of these traps. I bought this, I think, from the Sterling Fur Company in Sterling, Ohio. But what you do is you just set it over a hole, and so the only way he's got to get out is to go right up through that. And this trap just cuts him in half. I put it on a brick because, well, that squirrel's not going anywhere, but the coyotes are going to take it. I don't care if they take the squirrel, but I want my trap back. I also got an anchor. Most of the places that sell traps sell these things. My whole place is fenced, so when the coyote jumps over the fence, he's not. My trap's going to stay there. This will catch on something. There's Mr. Gopher. That guy's been fed well. But here's how you take care of gophers. This is an example of where they put it down in his garbage dump. But you'll see a mound of dirt. What you have to do is dig down and find that run. You don't know which way he's coming, where he's at. So that's why you need two traps. You can stake them like that. I just tie the two traps together. Then I put a board over the top. If they see light, they'll just block up the tunnel and won't come down here. But they're very curious little critters. So if you see a fresh mound and you put the two traps in there and cover it up, within 10 or 15 minutes you've got your gopher because he wants to see what you're doing. And what you see is there's two little points right there. And when he pushes that pan down, that point rips his heart out, kills him instantly. And here's some real good gopher.
Yes.
These guys really are worth their time to have around. And here's how you get them around. Put in a barn outhouse. They're fun to listen to and fun to watch. Okay, how do you do weed abatement? I do it with weed eaters in my garden tractor mowing it. I try to stay away from herbicides. The only trouble we have with weed eaters and garden tractors is if you get a little carried away and knock the bark off the bottom of the tree. And then you got an open sore for Mr. 715 top door to get. Mulch is a good way to keep the weeds down. Good old garden hoe to get those weeds out of there. And of course, the last resort is herbicides. I don't use them. There's a canker sore in a big macadamia. This was a huge tree. They didn't know what it was, so they didn't do anything. By the time they sent me that picture, it was too late. We couldn't save the tree. We tried to cut all that out, but it was too late. The tree was too far down. There's another branch on that same tree. That's what cinnamon we find top grow will do in the land. Bees will significantly increase your production on almost any plants you got, but it will certainly increase your production on macadamia nuts. The problem is macadamia blossoms are not particularly attractive to bees, so if you plant other things around that are more attractive, they won't measure the backs at all. They'll go to whatever else you got planted. So.
We can't hear you in the back.
There we go. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll try to do that. What I was saying, macadamia blossoms are not particularly attractive to bees, so if you got other things around, that's where the bees are going to go. You know, they really like red apple, those kind of things, but that doesn't help you get nuts production. If your trees are planted in a windy area, the bees can't get to the blossoms. But bees will also give you honey. And if you've had any mess with killer bees, you got to kill them. You can't have those things around. I have 2 hives in my grove, and the killer bees moved into one of the hives. And within 2 weeks, they flew down and they killed all the bees in the other hive too, and stole all the honey out of it. They didn't take that one over; they just killed all those honey bees. But as you start to get closer to that hive, starting about 70 feet away, the noise level starts to come up. And the closer you get, the higher up comes the noise level in those bees. And if you kill one of them, they will kill you. A killer bee, it releases a pheromone, it just drives them crazy. So when I got in that hive, I went up at night, actually my daughter did. We took a big plastic bag, pulled it down over the hive, and put a bug bulb on it. They would kill bugs. But you just can't have those things around. They're bad. And there's 2 hives. That's in my grove. Those are young macadamias right behind them. I put a little shade area over it to keep them a little bit cool. Harvesting. You know, a macadamia nut is right when it's laying on the ground. That's how they tell you they're ready to come home. Except for the beaumont. The beaumont doesn't like to drop its nuts. So if you're growing the beaumont's a very nice backyard tree. It's a very upright tree, a very pretty tree. And it sets about 4 or 5 flushes of blossoms a year. So most of the time when you get company, you take them out, you can show them blossoms on the tree, you can show them nuts at different stages of maturity on the tree, but it doesn't like to drop its nuts. So when the husk splits open, you want to pick them off the tree. If you got 100 acres, I don't know how you do that. South Africans have a big industry, and about half of their industry is beaumonts, and they're experimenting with sprays that they can spray on the tree to make it drop its nuts. I'm not sure I want to eat the nuts after they spray them, but that's what they're doing. And during the time that they start dropping, and if you're growing tetrafillers, we start harvesting in earnest about the 1st of November every year, give or take a couple of weeks. And we'll be harvesting through about April. But the majority of the nuts will be coming off the tree in November and December, Christmas time. Folks like to eat nuts. The longer you let them lay, the more they're going to deteriorate. You're going to open them up for pathogens or moths. And the nuts, you know, they're coming off the tree at about 30% moisture. Nice place to have bacteria grow. So you want to get them out of there. Here's some high-tech harvesting. But you notice the ground is clear. So about the 1st of October, we go out, we rake my grove and get all the leaves and all the sticks and all the crap out of there so that we can pick up the nuts. Now, I do have grass growing. This is not my grove. This lady by the name of D. Udell living in North Fallbrook. But we take care of my grass with the garden tractor and with weed eaters. This is a thing called a bag-o' nut. It just looks like it was originally made to pick up golf balls. But this gentleman keeps his grove clean, and he just pushes that thing through the grove and then picks up the nuts and puts them in a basket. Outfit down in Florida sells these things. And there's his wife. She has more sense. She pushes it. He was carrying it around. Once you've picked them up and got them harvested, you want to get that husk off them as soon as you can. You don't want to let them sit around in buckets in confined spaces. And then you want to put them in screen bottom trays. And they need to stay in air drying for at least 2 weeks. A couple things happen. When they come off the tree, they're about 35% moisture. 2 weeks in the screen bottom trays, they'll go down to about 5% moisture. They're still kind of gummy, they'll taste a lot like coconut. But macadamias have a thing called reducing sugars in them. And during that 2 weeks, an enzyme action will completely eliminate the reducing sugars. The reducing sugars taste a lot like sweet peas. That's not what you want your macadamias to taste like. But if you heat them up with when the reducing sugars are in them, they'll turn brown inside and out. So you don't have to do anything other than just let them sit for 2 weeks and then they'll go away. Once you've done that, if you're dealing with a co-op, it's time to take them to them, or you can heat dry them, store them in plastic bags, crack, and enjoy. This is a husker. This is a Paul Shaw husker. This guy does a pretty good job of ripping that husker. This is one of our displays at the LA County Fair a few years ago. Here's some drying trays with the air drying. These are stackable trays. You can see that on wheels, so we can push them around and get them out of the way. But each one of those is an individual tray that's individually stacked. It's got a little space in between. If you're going to put them in dryers, you can buy one of those nice little round dryers at Walmart for like $25 for drying any fruit and nuts. But don't dry them too hot. My dryers go to 95 degrees and sit there. And it depends on how much moisture is in the air, the efficiency of your dryer, how long it's going to take. Once you've dried them, crack them and see, and if they're not dry enough, put them back in the dryer for a little longer.
You need a lot of airflow.
When I put the nuts in those trays, I do put a fan on them. Because, as I said, coming off the trees, those are 35% moisture. That's a lot of moisture. And so they'll grow moldy pretty fast. So yeah, I put a fan on them. Here's a little dryer, and I said you could get it at Walmart. Here's some big dryers. This big guy holds 300 pounds. This one holds about 175 pounds. These are old bread trays with hardware cloth on the bottom. Here's a schematic that was in, if you go to the University of California, Berkeley, and get their flyer on drying fruit and nuts, vegetables, they've got a schematic in there that shows you how to build it. There's a little wind tunnel down at the bottom. There's a solid board across right here. So this fan picks up fresh air from outside. There's some heating coils. In this case, they use light bulbs, but I use little glow coils, which are almost the same thing. So it circulates the air inside. Right up here is where it blows out the more moist air, and down here it picks up fresh air. These are crackers. A fellow named Craig Schmad built these. What those are is two long rollers, high carbon steel with knife blades cut in them. They're set on an angle, and so as they roll like this, so the nut wobbles down until those knife blades can hit it. So I don't have to size my nuts. We just dump the nuts in the hopper and it cracks them. This guy will do about 400 pounds an hour. This is a separator, looks like a raffle machine, but this pulls out the big nuts. I found that folks are willing to pay a premium for large nuts, so I pull out the large nuts and give them the opportunity to do that. Here's another nut sizer. Here's another nut sizer. So you're all kinds of ways to separate the nuts into different sizes. And there's what it's all about, growing macadamia nuts. Here's some sources of information. Any questions?
just